So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar. My name is Cynthia. I'm the head of English at the British Council, Brazil. The British Council is the UK's international organization for cultural relations and educational opportunities. And among the work that we do, we also foster research capabilities and collaborations between the UK and, in our case specifically, with Brazil. We are at the office in São Paulo to present and discuss the UK-Brazil English Collaboration Call, a call for proposals to fund collaborative projects aimed at improving the teaching of English in secondary and tertiary education. So before we start with the content of the webinar, I'd like to have your attention to a few points. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please type on the comments box on YouTube. We'll be following that, and right after the presentations, we'll be also answering these questions. Please do share the link to this live session with colleagues. The video will be available in our YouTube channel, British Council Brazil, after the webinar, so you are able to share this with other people interested in submitting proposals. So before we start, so you're aware a bit of the content, what's going to happen today in this webinar. First of all, I'm going to present the call itself, a bit of the structure, how it works, who can apply, the research lines, and so on, and a few details. After that, we'll move on to some tips on how to submit a successful proposal. And then we'll have a Q&A session with answering questions that people have sent us previously, and also the questions that we're receiving right now during the webinar. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible. So now we're going to move to the presentation of the call itself. So a bit of the context for this call. So if we think about higher education, we have moved past the Science Without Borders, and now we are moving more towards the internationalization at home agenda. Maybe you have seen that 2 days ago, CAPES has launched the universities that were approved in the program called PRINT. And these universities will receive, in the next 4 years, 300 million reais in investments a year to foster their internationalization strategies. So we have the scenario, but we still have a lot of barriers regarding the internationalization of higher education in Brazil. For example, the ability to operate effectively in English and other languages is still a barrier that we face. Only 3% of academics and researchers have C1 proficiency level of English. That will be advanced levels of English, according to surveys done by Languages Without Borders. And there is still a growing pressure in terms of publishing more papers in English, and also being able to host, not just send academics abroad and students abroad, but also fostering mobility to Brazil as well, hosting overseas, hosting academics as well. So this is more or less the scenario that we have in higher education. If we think about basic education, there has been some important changes in concerning English in Brazil. So English has become a compulsory component in lower and upper secondary education in Brazil. And we have the National Common Curriculum Framework that has been approved nationally, including the English language component. So it means that states are now developing, re-elaborating their own English curriculum, among other things. And of course, we have to ensure that teachers' practices comply with those. States also face challenges in terms of improving the English proficiency level of the country's English teachers. So we have around 2.2 million teachers as a whole, but for English we have around 73,000 English teachers in the public school system. It's important that we work with the public school system if we consider that 85% of the students study in public schools, while only 15% of Brazilian students are enrolled in private schools. Um, the work that we do, so we share expertise and strengthen collaboration between Brazilian and UK institutions, both in basic and in higher education. So just for you to understand a bit of the work that the British Council does, here, this is the work, for example, that we do in higher education. We work with research, system improvement, thought leadership, system improvement, and capacity building. And here are a few examples of programs that we have. So for example, we try to promote research in order to bring more knowledge and promote discussions. So we are launching now in partnership with FAUBAI in September a guide to Brazilian higher education courses in English. So this is one of the actions that we are doing. We are also supporting the internationalization of higher education in Brazil, and this call, for example, is also a way to support capacity building, research, and support to universities. So now moving on to the call itself. Here you have the objectives and outcomes of the call. So as to the specific objectives, we want to improve and or change English language learning and teaching in Brazil. So that's the focus of the call, by tackling key gaps in the current knowledge regarding the lines of research. I'm going to talk about the lines of research soon. And this in turn will support informing and improving both policy and practice in English language learning and teaching in Brazil, and of course strengthen strategic partnerships between Brazilian and UK higher education institutions. And we hope to achieve through this call a dissemination to inform public policies around English language learning and teaching, and also the collaboration between UK and Brazil will also transform English language practices across Brazil. So basically, who can apply for this call? So the target audience is of experienced researchers. On the Brazilian side, public and private universities, as well as federal and research institutes with a proven track record in English language research. And from the UK side, the target audiences of universities, colleges, and other private institutions with an interest in the Americas region and a track record also in English language research. You also have here the two research lines that are being fostered. So one of them, English language policies at the institutional level, as a main component to the higher education internationalization process. So how does English language policies can support the internationalization process of higher educations in Brazil? The second research line goes back to the basic education and the challenges that we're facing now. How can we improve English language teaching and learning at lower and upper secondary levels where English has become mandatory in public schools, particularly regarding themes such as curriculum development, pre-service, in-service teacher training, use of technology, and assessment. These are a few examples of focus of proposals. And then possible institutional arrangements. You can either decide to have a bilateral arrangement where you're going to have one UK institution and one Brazilian institution, or a trilateral arrangement where you can have two Brazilian institutions and one UK institutions, or the other way around, that is two UK institutions and one Brazilian institution involved. So in case it's a bilateral arrangement, the administration of resources or full of administration will be by either of the parties, either one of the parties. In the trilateral one, this is important to notice, uh, the funding agency, so CONFAP, is taking part in bilateral arrangements, not in trilateral ones. For trilateral arrangements, the British Council will be funding this type of arrangement. So the sole provider of the grant funding will be British Council. For both strands, match funding will count to the assessment. We'll come to that in a bit. In this slide, you can see which of the Brazilian state funding agencies that have agreed to match fund this call. So you have the states of Paraná, Alagoas, Amapá, Amazonas, Ceará, Goiás, Maranhão, Mato Grosso, and Piauí. It's important to say that Distrito Federal and Minas Gerais, they are not taking part in the SCOL anymore, okay? So these are the states that have the funding agencies, the only ones, the ones that are listed here, they are the only ones who have decided really to take part of the call and are continuing to take part. In terms of the funding, we are going to fund around 10 or more projects. The maximum funding for each project will be of £10,000, which is approximately right now 51,000 reais. And you have an implementation period of 7 months for the whole project. And here you have some of the costs that will be covered by the grant funds. Here you have some examples of the costs that will be covered, but it's important to say that some of the participating FAPs may have their own guidelines. So it's important that you consult the supporting FAP of your state if you're a Brazilian researcher taking part in the call. So proposals will receive a match funding from the FAPs. It will be a maximum of £10,000. So for example, you are submitting a proposal and the Brazilian researcher involved, he is asking for the match funding of the FAP. So it means if the proposal is approved, it means the British Council will come in with 50% of the funding, that is £5,000, and the funding agency will come with another £5,000. Okay? Proposals receiving grants from the British Council, that is, if you are not from a state which has a funding agency taking part in the call, you are still eligible to submit a proposal, and if approved, the British Council will grant 100% of the funding. How can you apply? Proposals, they have to be presented jointly by the UK and the Brazilian institution, and it has to be submitted via the British Council's website. That is very important. The application form and template for the project's cost estimate is available in our website. In the end of the webinar, I'm going to show a bit of these templates where you can find them. And here are the documents that you will have to submit and upload into the application form. To finish off this presentation around the call, so we have here the assessment criteria. Please take some time in looking at this assessment criteria. We have the eliminatory one. It means, have you submitted everything that was needed? If so, great. And then you have the other criteria, quality of proposals. You have a few questions that we have put here to support you in, going through this and seeing, well, have I really thought about all of these things, all of these questions when developing the proposal? So we have assessment criteria and the weights, quality of proposal, applicability, resources, and the expertise. And the timeline. So there is still 1 month to go um, before closing the call. So you have until the 21st of September 2018 to submit the call, to submit a proposal. Please don't leave it for the last minute because there could be some technical issues and we won't be able to help with that if it's past the deadline. So please be careful, okay? So now that you've seen the main points on the call, I'm going to introduce you to one of our two guests of today, who will give some important recommendations for applications and tips for submitting a successful proposal. So Tim Phillips, he's joining us today on Skype. Tim is the head of teacher development for English at the British Council. He's in Manchester. He leads our Teaching for Success project, which supports the development of primary and secondary teachers in state education systems worldwide. He has worked overseas as an English language teacher and teacher trainer in schools, universities, and teacher training centers. Among other activities, he's a member of the advisory board of the English Language Teaching Journal. Hi, Tim. It's great to have you here, and we're really curious to hear your recommendations and tips on submitting a successful proposal.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Cynthia. Yeah, I mean, the British Council has a lot of experience in awarding research grants and evaluating proposals. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience of evaluating those proposals and some of the areas which are relevant to putting in a good proposal and some of the things we've noticed in proposals over the years. And I'm going to look at it in terms of 4 areas. The first one, so Cynthia has been outlining what the aim of the research collaboration partnerships are, and has also been looking at showing you the assessment criteria. So this is obviously the checklist that you need to use to make sure that you're fulfilling all these things. In particular, making clear that your topic meets the specific objectives of the collaboration call, and that the proposal you're making is making a clear and effective contribution to them. So those specific objectives are promoting systematic investigation, contributing to improvements and or changes in English language learning and teaching in Brazil. So that's a very specific area. Tackling key gaps in current knowledge regarding these lines of research to inform and improve policy and practice. So making sure that your proposal refers to this area, and strengthening strategic partnerships between Brazil and Brazilian and UK higher education institutions. So again, something around the partnership. So making sure that you make your proposal is presenting a clear and effective contribution to these objectives, making sure that you cover the assessment criteria that Cynthia has been showing you. I think one thing of those I would particularly point out is around the budgeting. So making sure you've got accurate budgeting and that you haven't left out anything significant or anything that the evaluators will say, well, wait a minute, we can't see any reference to that. So making sure you're fairly rigorous around what the costs are. So following the guidance is obviously a key factor. But then I want to talk about 3 other areas to focus on. One is around the benefit for all those involved. To make sure that your proposal shows clear benefit for the wider community and not only for the researchers involved. Sometimes proposals we've had clearly show that researchers have got a strong interest in something and they want to explore it, but we want to see how that particular interest can be related to a wider community. That may be different according to the focus of the proposal. So it might be a wider community in the higher education sector or in the school sector, or it's always good to be fairly specific about how you're going to benefit people beyond the researchers involved. One thing possibly is to say not too niche. If there are various areas of research which are research interest, but possibly are a bit too narrow or a bit too specific to meet the particular objectives of this call. Another aspect is having a practical application to issues in the Brazilian context. So make sure you focus on issues of real importance in higher education and or secondary education. This could be areas which are already recognised, which are worthy of further investigation, or it may be areas which are under-recognised, but in fact, with a bit of research evidence, may be quite important to understanding the overall situation. Clearly, to make sure it's got a Brazilian relevance, but also we would like to see how it's linked to global understanding, because there's always good examples of interest more widely. Making sure that it's got practical outputs for teachers and other practitioners. So in some way, what the outputs of the research are going to, you're indicating what areas might be of benefit to specific practitioners. Not that it's necessarily a toolkit for practitioners, but it's contributing to understanding which will help them. And also making sure that you provide the evidence that you're developing can be communicated to help policy and decision making. So making sure you're clear about how you're going to make it accessible, the results of your research. Another area is the collaboration between Brazil and the UK, clearly a focus on areas of Brazilian interest. We want to see in the proposal good evidence of collaboration, so benefit for both sides, and a sharing of UK-Brazilian expertise. So what particularly can the UK provide, and what does the Brazilian side provide, and also a balance in doing this. I think also clarity of roles of participants will be very helpful in understanding the proposal. So who's doing what is expected on the Brazilian side, on the UK side, and again making sure there's a balance of the workload. And evidence of building building research capacity. So this is an opportunity to work together. So an indication of how actually doing the research may build capacity, build expertise, enable Brazilian academics to engage with the wider global research community that functions in English. And finally, an area around the research contribution itself. So obviously we're looking at a good basis in existing research. So we want to have some indication of what current understanding you're building on, but covering some new ground, not just replicating previous research, but taking it slightly forward in looking at gaps and providing some new information. Clearly within the time frame of 7 months and the funding available, there's limitations on time and scale. So clearly a proposal that can be demonstrates it is achievable, feasible and practical within those limitations. So focus is very important, and making sure that you don't try to be over-ambitious within the limitations there are. In terms of a topic, the impact potential, so how will it, how directly will it stimulate further insights and action? The coherence and rigor of the proposal, so it'll be gathering data. So we want to see that some understanding of the quality of the data you intend to produce and how you'll analyse it, so that we can be fairly confident that it'll be good value and reliable, valuable data, even though it's probably on small scale. And finally, clearly that you're showing awareness of an ethical approach to educational research. The UK, we have the BERA guidelines, the BERA guidelines, British Educational Research Association, ethical guidelines, and obviously any research, some awareness of in the proposal that you're going to make sure that you're following those kind of guidelines around consent from participants, transparency of what you're doing and of the information you're gathering, an awareness of potential harm or risks, maybe that may be potential within the research, and obviously concern for privacy and data storage issues around the information that you gather. So all these things, I think, are things which we've picked up in previous research proposals that we like to see, and I hope that will give you a little bit of guidance on putting in a good collaboration call. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim, for these insights and valuable tips. Last but not least, now I'm going to introduce our second guest of the day, Flavia Cerqueira. Thanks for being here. Flavia has majors in History and International Relations and a master's in International Relations from the International University of Japan. Since January 2017, she has been working at CONFAPI, the National Council of State Research Funding Agencies, where she's responsible for articulating and coordinating calls with international partners and state funding agencies. Here in Brazil, we call them FAPEs. So thanks for being here in São Paulo. Flavia is usually in Brasilia, but she was kind enough to come here to be with us today. And to start with, is there any point you'd like to highlight or tips for Brazilian researchers that are interested in requesting match funding from a participating FAPE?
First, I'd like to thank Cynthia for the invitation to take part of this important webinar and say hi to everyone. Related to the FAPE's participation, I would like to emphasize that the candidate has to contact its FAPE to verify if there is some special criteria before submitting the proposal.
Okay, so this is something very important. So if you are indeed submitting a proposal and you're a researcher from a funding agency that is taking part in the call, please do contact your FAPE before actually submitting the call, the proposal. Thank you. So I think now we can move on to the Q&A session. So we're going to start with some questions that were already sent to us, and my colleague Patricia afterwards, she will bring some questions that are being sent right now through our YouTube comments box. So the first question I'm going to direct to Flavia. So Flavia, we received a question regarding the state funding agencies. So Someone asked, the state funding agencies from my state didn't join the call, or there is no state funding agency in my state. Can I apply? And in that case, can I apply to either a bilateral or trilateral arrangement? Sorry.
For the FAP support is only for the bilateral arrangement. At the same time, if you are not taking, the state fund agents of your state is not taking part of this call, you can still participate in the call for proposal, but you cannot request the support from the FAPs. The resource has to be requested only to British Council, and if you have some match funding, it's very beneficial for your proposal, as you can see in the assessment criteria.
Good. And I think it's also important to note that even though you don't have a state funding agency match funding the proposal, if your institution in Brazil or in the UK wants to match fund the proposal, it's possible as well. So either state funding agencies or the institutions involved are also able to match fund the proposal. So a second question that we received, Flavia, will the FAPI from my state have specific requirements? I couldn't find guidelines on FAPI's website.
If you have difficult to verify if your FAPI has some special criteria for this call, you can contact me by the email chamadas_uk@gmail.com. Because I can try to find this information, but the FAPs, they have the general rules. They are very important to follow these, but they may have some special ones for this call.
Yeah, so we're also going to provide in the end the emails to contact British Council and CONFAPI as well. Thank you for that. And now we have another question regarding match funding. So if we secure match funding, how much will be the maximum amount of the grant from the British Council and from the partner institution?
About the FAP's participation, the FAP will support the call proposal with 50% and the British Council with 50%. So in reais value, it will be around 25,500 reais for each partner.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to remember, if it's a bilateral arrangement, then if the state funding agency is taking part in the call, 50% will come from the FAPI and 50% will be granted from the British Council. And the cap is of £10,000. But what is important to say is that please do take some time in filling out the budget template, because that's where you're going to actually justify why are you going to need this amount of money. If you think you need less than £10,000, then of course you're not going to ask for the £10,000. But everything, if you do need the £10,000, it's fine, as long as you can justify why do you need this money and the activities you're going to run. If it's a trilateral agreement, then there won't be a match funding from FAPIs. It means the £10,000, if the proposal is approved, will come from the British Council. What can happen in this case for trilateral agreements, the institutions involved can decide to match fund the proposal, and then it's at least £5,000. So we ask that the institutions involved provide at least £5,000 as a match funding, and then the British Council will come in with the £5,000 to have a total of £10,000 for this proposal approved. Okay, so another question that we've received. I am from a Brazilian university and I don't have a British partner. Will the British Council make the connection with a British institution? Um, so I think it's important to say that we have more or less a month, basically a month to go up until the call is closed. So you have right now a tight schedule. So the institutions that would like to submit a proposal, they are the responsible ones in terms of finding a suitable partner. If you have questions, if you need to discuss this a bit further, if you'd like suggestions, we can support. So please, in the end, we're going to show you the emails for you to contact us. So please do contact us. But it's important to say that the institution is actually responsible in finding the suitable partner. Okay? We cannot guarantee that. We can support, but we can't guarantee finding one specifically. Um, Now, besides universities, what kinds of institutions are eligible? So one thing that Tim Phillips mentioned, and it's really important, I'd like to reiterate that. Take some time to take a look at the guideline. The guideline of the call is goes through all the points, and there you will find who is eligible to apply to submit a proposal. On the Brazilian side, we'll have universities, Brazilian universities, private and public ones, federal institutes, and also research institutes. On the UK side, eligible are universities, colleges, and other private institutions with interest in the American regions, as I presented in the call. Another question. Do the UK and the Brazil institutions need to have a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, signed to submit a proposal? Not necessarily. So you will see on how to apply which are the documents that you have to upload. It has to be a support letter, an institutional one, from the institutions involved. So if I have a bilateral arrangement, I'm going to need one institutional letter from the UK institution and one from the Brazilian institution. And why do we ask that? We don't want the research just to be researcher and researcher without the knowledge of the institution. This happens sometimes. We want the institutions to support the initiative and to see the importance of the initiative. That's why we are requesting this support letter, but it doesn't have to be an MOU, okay? And then another question that we've received is, I am a researcher with experience in the research lines of the call, but I'm not currently employed in a university. So Flavia, could you answer if this person is eligible or not?
This person can support the proposal as a consulting, a collaborator, but the main leader of the proposal has to be a PI who is connected with a university in Brazil and in the UK.
Okay, good, thank you. So we're going to start now with a few questions that we have received through our YouTube comments box. But to kick off, I'd like to ask first of all a question to Tim Phillips. Tim, in your experience, what could be possible interesting areas to focus projects on, considering the two research lines, one around internationalization of higher education and the other one on improving English in lower and upper secondary education?
Yeah. So in the information about the call, you mentioned looking at the design, supporting the design and implementation of innovative, sustainable and scalable practices in secondary and or tertiary education. So clearly there is a practical application aspect of the research, that it's going to contribute in some way to giving an insight into what might work in improving English language use, in improving the internationalization of higher education. and which would help justify further research and investment in those particular areas. So, for example, at the higher education level, things like research that's providing insights into the barriers to the improvement of English amongst staff, so amongst academics who may be teaching in English or who may be writing and researching in English, administrative staff also who are working with international students, and the students themselves who, Brazilian students for example, who will need English for their careers and studies. So things investigating what the current needs are, what current provision is, what evidence of effective provision of English in the sector is, case studies that can look at look at a situation and give a range of insights of different factors involved in that. At the secondary education level, while these are issues related to curriculum reform, which is happening in English in the education system, clearly anything around curriculum reform has a teacher education element. But also, I think that one of the drivers is to improve the level of English of students. So there are many areas of potential research among students, for example, the motivation to learn English, the access to English beyond that, beyond the classroom, evidence, for example, of students learning themselves. I mean, there's quite a lot of evidence now of young people using the internet and developing English skills on their own. That's a relatively untapped area, I think, in formal education, but clearly is contributing to development of language skills, because teenagers are very motivated to use social media and other things on the internet. So those are some of the potential areas that might be might contribute well to the call.
Thank you, Tim. I think that was very helpful, and it helps also already answer a few questions that we have been receiving right now. So one of the questions that we received is from Tim Lewis, and he asks, does the British Council prefer bilateral or trilateral arrangements? So we don't prefer one or the other. I think the right question would be, how can my proposal, how can the project that I'm proposing actually support one of the two strand lines in terms of tackling the challenges that we are facing in both areas? And then in terms of thinking about the partner institution that I'm going to look for, how does this partner institution contribute to the research that I'm doing, contribute and complements the research that I'm doing, and how will this inform policy and practice? Okay? So basically, no, it's really up to you, and what is the project that you are submitting, and what you actually, what are the objectives and the outcomes that you are hoping to achieve through this research project. Then we have a question from Ron Martinez, and he asks, regarding the higher education strand, the wording seems to focus on policy. Must the proposals be about policy, or can it be research with a view to inform policy? So the answer is yes, it can. So it's how practices also can support informing policy. So I think trying to understand a bit of the challenges that we are facing. So if we're talking about the strand on higher education, you can think about, for example, one of the main challenges that we face around English is that researchers, academics in general, they have low levels of English. So how can I improve something that is already being done here in Brazil in terms of English language policies? So, for example, how can I improve classes being given? This is just one example, but just for you to understand, how can I improve classes that are being given with English as a medium of instruction in a way that it can become more sustainable, and this practice can be, not just from one professor that is fluent in English, but I can provide the tools to help academics in general give their classes through English as well. And this becomes something that the university does institutionally, and it's not only dependent on one or two professors who are actually able and proficient in English, for example. Could you answer the next one, Flavia, please?
There is also another question from Tim Lewis. Is 10K for 7 months suggests that you are selecting high focus proposal. Is that the case? Yes, we are selecting very good proposal in the both objectives of this call for proposal.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that we are providing seed funding to foster research in this area. So we know it's not a huge funding, but the idea is really, to promote research and collaboration between UK and Brazil in English language learning and teaching. And that's why for 10K, we believe that 7 months is enough to start doing this research. Okay, so these were some of the questions that we've received. Before we finish the webinar, I'd like to show you where you can find the information you need on the call in our website, and some details on the step on how to submit your proposal. So basically, to apply for the call, if you go to the British Council Brazil website, so if you type British Council Brazil on Google, you'll find our website. You will see as one of the highlights, we have the call, the UK-Brazil English Collaboration Call. So you click there and you'll be directed to the web page where we have all the information around the call that you need. So first of all, you can see the general information on the call, where you can submit your proposal, where you have to click, and then in the end of this page, you'll find some very useful and important links. So the first one is the guideline. This is very important. This is the first document that you should see and take some time to look at it. And then there are two links that I want to highlight besides the guideline. One is a Word version. That's the second. You're going to see it's in red highlighted there. So it's a Word version of the application form. So basically, you have a Word version with the whole information provided in the application form. And why is it important that you, for example, before trying to submit the proposal in the online form, that you use this template to organize everything, all the information that you need to submit the proposal. When you go to the application form, you are not able to save versions that are not the final one before submitting it. So that's why we are providing a Word template. So basically, the idea is for you to work with this Word template, fill out all the information that is required. Once everything is done, filled out and checked, you submit this through the online form. Okay? And another important link is the one regarding the budget. So you're gonna have an Excel file where you're going to put exactly what are the activities that you are going to develop in this project and how much are you going to need for each of these activities. It's also important to say that there are two spreadsheets. So the first one is for the budget as a whole for the project, and in case you are a Brazilian researcher submitting a match funding from a state funding agency, you need also to fill out the second spreadsheet that is exactly about the budget you're going to ask for the funding, sorry, you're going to ask for the funding agency. Okay? So this is important that you fill out. So these are the two documents that are interesting for you also to take a look at, that are essential for you in submitting your application. So once you have it ready, you're set. So you can open the application form. You're seeing now the application form. You're going to go through it, fill it out. And one other important information is please do pay attention to the supporting documents that are needed. You won't be able to finish the application form and submit it before you attach the documents, the supporting documents. You have here a list of the documents. So you need the detailed proposal, the budget spreadsheet with the British Council funding. If you're not requesting funding from a state funding agency, you don't have to fill out the FAP funding. If you do, you fill it out and you attach it as well. And also important, the supporting letters from the institutions involved. Okay? So I would suggest you take a look at the application form in the Word file. If you have doubts, we're going to give you the email addresses from the British Council and CONFAP. Please do get in touch. And a last reminder is that the deadline to submit proposal is the 21st of September, so there's still a month to go. So I wish everyone a good luck, and we're really excited to receive the proposals and see possible projects that will be moving forward. So the webinar is coming to an end. So before we finish off, first, Flavia, is there anything else you'd like to cover, to say, tips or anything to everyone who's watching the webinar?
I wish to everyone good luck, and we are expecting very good proposals. And if you have some difficulty to contact the FAPs about the specific criteria, you can write to me. Good luck.
Thank you. And Tim, is there anything else you'd like to cover? Any final remarks?
Well, I would just say that yes, I'm looking forward to some very interesting areas of research that will contribute to what is clearly a great need in the Brazilian context, to understand better the situation and to take things forward there.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. And as for myself, one final point that I like to highlight is that one of the points that you will have to provide information on in the application form is the dissemination plan. So you will have to say, okay, what am I going to do with this research? So how can I disseminate this with a wider community to make sure that this research is not just staying in the institutions that are involved in, but that more people are benefiting from the information and analysis and evidences that were developed through this partnership. And it goes a bit into the question from Ron. So how can we inform through this practice of research? How can we, for example, inform policy? Okay, so Tim and Flavia, thank you for being here today. It was really interesting to have your input in this webinar. I hope it was informational for everyone and helpful to researchers and other people involved in submitting proposals and interested in submitting proposals. And above all, thank you everyone for joining us today. If you still have questions, if you're struggling with anything around the call, please do get in touch with us. You're going to see our emails from CONFAPI and from British Council. Please get in touch, and we'll see you guys next time.